Chapter 1. Dinner Table of Shame. The smell of stew filled the small dining room, but no one was really eating. My father's spoon hit the edge of his bowl again and again, a slow, angry rhythm that made my stomach twist. "Do you know what people are saying about us?" he said. His words were thick with drink. "They say our name means nothing now. Nothing." I kept my eyes on the table. The wooden grain had tiny cracks that looked like rivers. If I stared at them long enough, maybe I could drift away. My mother's sigh came next. Maybe if our daughter had done her duty, we wouldn't be in this mess. I knew she meant me. She always did. I tried to swallow my bite, but it stuck in my throat. "Mother, I didn't what?" she snapped. "Didn't marry the alpha's son when you had the chance? Didn't save this family's name?" My father slammed his cup down. Wine spilled across the table. "Do you know how much I lost trying to fix what you broke?" I bit my tongue. I wanted to shout that he had lost everything long before I ever said no to that match, that it was his gambling and his pride that ruined us. But words never helped here. They only made him louder. My little sister Aurelia sat beside him in her perfect gold dress. She smiled like she was watching a play. "You could have been the wife of an alpha, you know," she said softly, pretending pity. "Instead, you're nothing." The words slid in like knives. I wanted to tell her that I didn't need to marry for status, that I still believed in love and choice. But what good would that do? In this house, belief was weakness. Father leaned back, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Sitting there quiet like some saint. Too proud to do what's right." I looked up at him for the first time that night. His eyes were glassy, his hair falling loose from its tie. Once he had been handsome, the kind of man who made rooms hush when he entered. Now he was just tired and angry. "I'm not proud," I said. My voice came out small. "I just want to choose for myself." Aurelia laughed. "Choose? You? Who would ever choose you?" The silence that followed was worse than shouting. My mother's fork hit the table. "Enough, Aurelia," she said, though her tone held no real defense for me. Father rubbed his temples. "Tomorrow you'll go to the market with your sister. Learn how to smile. Learn how to be useful." I nodded. There was no point in fighting. The candles burned low. The air smelled of wine and bitterness. I wondered when our home had stopped feeling like one. Maybe it was the night he lost the last of his fortune at the gambling tables. Maybe it was the day I said no to a man I didn't love. Or maybe it was always this way, and I was just too young to see it. Later, when I went to my small room under the stairs, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the thin box hidden beneath it. Inside lay a pair of cream-colored gloves. The fabric was worn but clean. They were the last gift from my best friend, Lyra. She had been kind, soft-spoken, and poor, the daughter of our house's cook. When we were children, she used to sneak me sweets from the kitchen. My parents hated her, called her a servant's child, but she was the only one who ever treated me like I mattered. She got sick when we were 15. The healers tried everything, but nothing worked. Before she died, she gave me these gloves. "Wear them," she said, "when the world feels cold." I held them now, feeling the smooth fabric against my palm. The world had never felt colder. Down the hall, my father's voice rose again, arguing with my mother about debts. The sound carried through the thin walls. "She'll do as I say," he shouted. "If she won't save this family, I'll make sure Aurelia does." My mother didn't answer. Only the sound of clinking glasses followed. I pressed the gloves to my chest. "I'm sorry, Lyra," I whispered. "I'm trying to be brave." Outside, the wind howled through the shutters. I imagined it carrying my words far away, past the village, past the forest, to some place where kindness still meant something. I lay down without changing clothes. The bed creaked, the sheets smelled of dust, but sleep came anyway. In my dreams, I was running barefoot across an open field, Lyra's laughter beside me. For a while, it was almost enough. Chapter 2. The royal feast. The next morning, the house was louder than it had been in years. Mother was shouting for servants who no longer worked for us. Father was polishing his old medals. Aurelia stood in front of the mirror, twisting her golden hair and humming. "What's happening?" I asked. Father turned to me, his eyes wide with excitement and greed. "We've been invited to the royal feast," he said. "The savage Alpha King himself is hosting. Every noble house is called." "The king?" I blinked. "That can't be right. We haven't been to court in years." He waved a hand. "Maybe he remembers my service. Maybe he knows I was once a great man." His smile was strange, too eager. "This is our chance to rise again." Mother was already pulling out her best gown. "We'll bring Aurelia to the front. She'll charm the nobles. Who knows, the king might even notice her." Aurelia blushed. "Do you think so?" "Of course," Mother said. "You are our jewel." Then her gaze shifted to me. The warmth vanished. "You, however, will stay quiet. Do not embarrass us." I nodded. I had expected nothing else. By evening, the carriage was ready. The horses looked tired, like they too felt the weight of my father's hopes. I wore my plain blue dress, the one I stitched myself. The hem was frayed, but it was clean. Aurelia, dressed in gold silk, looked like the sun beside me. As we rode toward the castle, I stared out the window. The city glowed with lanterns. People lined the streets to watch the nobles pass. I wondered if any of them ever dreamed of being free from all this. The castle rose high above the hills, towers of stone and glass catching the last light of day. Guards stood at every gate, their armor shining. Inside, the halls sparkled with gold. Music drifted through the air, soft strings and laughter. I could feel eyes on us as we entered, measuring our worth by our clothes, our names, our smiles. Father puffed out his chest. "Remember, everyone," he whispered. "Act noble." Mother nodded and pushed Aurelia forward. "Smile, dear. The king's men are watching." No one looked at me. That was fine. I preferred it that way. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the stories I had heard of the savage Alpha King, the ruler who had ended wars with his bare hands, whose temper could break bones and whose silence could freeze a room. Some said he was cursed. Others said he simply refused to love. I told myself I'd never see him up close anyway. People like me didn't get noticed. Chapter 3. Know Your Place. The night of the feast arrived like a dream that felt too bright to be real. I was told to wear one of the servants' old dresses, brown and simple, so Aurelia's beauty would stand out. I didn't argue. When I came down the stairs, Father frowned. "Try not to look miserable," he said. "We can't have people thinking you're jealous." Mother adjusted Aurelia's jewels. "You should be thankful to attend at all." "I am," I said quietly. They didn't hear me. The hall was already filled with music and chatter when we entered. Golden light poured from chandeliers. The smell of roasted meat and wine filled the air. I followed a few steps behind my family, as ordered. Father stopped every few feet to greet old friends who barely remembered him. "Good to see you, Lord Thane," one of them said, though his smile looked strained. Mother whispered reminders. "Smile wider. Bow lower." Aurelia glowed under the attention. People called her beautiful. No one noticed me. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here to shine. I was here to survive the night. At one point, Aurelia gasped. One of her fine white gloves had torn. "No," she hissed. "How will I greet the nobles like this?" Her eyes found me. "Give me yours." I froze. The gloves on my hands, cream-colored soft, were the ones Lyra had given me. "No," I said gently. "They were a gift." Her face hardened. "She's dead. She won't mind. I mind." She stomped her foot like a child. "Father," she called across the room. "She's refusing to help me." Father's head turned, his cheeks red from drink. "What's this?" "She won't give me her gloves," Aurelia said, her voice sweet with fake hurt. Mother's eyes narrowed. Is that true? They were my friends, I said softly. The only thing I have left of her. Father's voice grew sharp. Give them to your sister, don't make a scene. I shook my head. I can't. He stepped closer, his breath thick with wine. You selfish, foolish girl. You always have to ruin everything. Mother hissed. Stop it. People are watching. But it was too late. His hand rose. The sound of the slap cracked through the air, and that was the moment everything changed. Chapter 4. The Feast of Power. The first thing I remember is the sound of the gates. They opened with a deep groan like a beast waking from sleep, and our carriage rolled into the king's palace yard. I had never seen anything like it. The walls rose higher than I could see, black stone shining with torches that burned blue instead of gold. Banners hung from the towers, each one marked with the crest of the savage Alpha King, a silver wolf surrounded by fire. Inside the carriage, my father fixed his old coat and cleared his throat. Back straight, he said, though his own hands shook. When we step out, remember who we are. Who we were, maybe. The name Marin used to mean something before the debts, before the shame. Mother's perfume filled the air. Smile, she whispered to Aurelia. The nobles will be watching. And what about me? I asked quietly. Mother's eyes flicked toward me, cold and sharp. You'll stay behind, do not draw attention. Do not speak unless spoken to. So I said nothing. When we stepped into the hall, light hit my eyes so hard it almost hurt. Hundreds of candles hung from chandeliers above us, their flames trembling against mirrors and crystal. The air smelled like roasted meat and sweet wine. Laughter rolled through the crowd like waves hitting shore. Nobles were everywhere. Men in coats stitched with gold, women in gowns that looked like sunsets. Jewels glittered on every neck, every wrist, every crown. Even the servants here moved like dancers, their trays held high, faces blank and perfect. Our family did not belong among them. I knew it the moment I saw the way people looked at us. Their eyes slid over father's patched sleeves, mother's worn pearls, Aurelia's desperate smile. Then they reached me, and lingered. Not out of admiration, out of confusion. I wasn't wearing silk or lace. My dress was plain blue linen stitched by my own hands. My hair was tied back in a simple braid. I looked like a servant who had wandered into the wrong room. I tried to make myself smaller. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, sat the man everyone whispered about, the savage Alpha King. He didn't look like a man who needed to prove his power. He didn't even wear a crown. His cloak was black fur, his hands bare except for thin scars running across his knuckles. His hair was dark and uncombed, his beard trimmed short but uneven. He sat with one knee bent, his elbow on the armrest, his gaze sharp as a blade. Even from across the room I felt his presence. It was heavy, alive. The noble's laughter softened every time he moved. Servants bowed without being told. It was like the whole room breathed on his command. Rumors whispered through the air that he once tore through a rogue pack alone, that his wolf was half beast, that no woman survived him long enough to be called mate. He didn't look cruel. He looked tired, the kind of tired that turns into anger when pushed too far. Aurelia leaned close to me and whispered, "He doesn't even smile." "Would you?" I murmured. "If the whole world feared you?" She rolled her eyes. "You just don't understand power." Maybe she was right. Father led us deeper into the hall, greeting nobles whose names I barely knew. Some turned away quickly, pretending not to see him. Others gave polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. He didn't care. "They remember me," he said under his breath. "They all remember." Mother nodded. "Keep close to Aurelia," she told me. "You make her look kinder when you stand beside her." I bit my lip but followed. The king hadn't moved since we entered. He sat still, watching the hall. When his gaze swept over us, I froze. For a heartbeat, our eyes met. My chest tightened. Then he looked away. The air felt colder after that. Music began. Drums, flutes, and low strings filled the hall. Servants poured wine into golden cups. The nobles laughed louder, their voices full of forced joy. The king didn't drink, he only watched. Every few minutes, someone would glance toward the dais, hoping for a nod, a smile, any sign of approval. None came. I understood why they called him savage. It wasn't his anger. It was his silence. My father couldn't stop drinking. With every goblet, his voice grew stronger, his laughter sharper. "This," he said to anyone who would listen, "is what true nobility looks like." Mother scolded him softly. "Keep your voice down." But he didn't listen. He never did. Aurelia laughed when others laughed, bowed when others bowed, and tossed her hair so the candlelight caught it just right. She looked every inch the golden daughter she wanted to be. I stayed near the wall, watching. The marble under my feet was cool and smooth. My reflection shimmered faintly in it. Small, pale, unimportant. At one point, the king stood. He didn't raise his hands for silence. He didn't need to. Every voice in the room fell quiet. "You feast under my roof tonight," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled every space. "Remember who keeps your borders safe and your children fed. Drink to peace. Honor the blood that bought it." Everyone lifted their cups. "To the king!" The shout echoed. He sat again, eyes unreadable as if none of this mattered. When the music started once more, the noble's laughter came out strained. I couldn't stop watching him. He wasn't what I expected. He didn't move like a noble. He moved like a fighter who didn't trust the floor not to shift beneath him. Even the way he breathed was measured. Calm on purpose, as if control was the only thing holding him together. Sometimes his gaze swept across the hall and landed on nothing, as though he was somewhere else entirely. Aurelia caught me looking. "Do you think he's handsome?" she asked with a teasing grin. "I think he's dangerous." "That's the same thing," she whispered. Hours passed. Laughter turned to murmurs. The wine turned sharp. The heat of the hall thickened. Somewhere a servant dropped a tray, and the clang echoed like thunder. Everyone froze until the king lifted his hand slightly, dismissing it. Only then did the room breathe again. That tiny motion told me more about him than all the stories. Power didn't have to shout. It could whisper. Father leaned close to Mother again. "He needs a mate," he said. "Everyone knows it." "What if Aurelia—" Mother hushed him. "Don't say foolish things." But Aurelia's eyes sparkled. "Why not? He could choose anyone here." She smoothed her golden dress. "Maybe he'll choose me." Father smiled, drunk and dreaming. Our family would be restored overnight. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. What could I tell them? That the king looked like a man who had already lost everything once? That he wasn't someone who could be won like a prize? They wouldn't listen anyway. A fanfare of horns rang out from the far doors, signaling the start of the royal toast. Servants refilled cups, and nobles straightened their posture. The king lifted his goblet again, his gaze sweeping the tables. "Drink deep," he said, "for this peace will not last forever." A chill ran down my spine. His voice wasn't proud, it was warning. When he sat, everyone drank in silence. Later, as the night grew late and the wine thickened, the room's shine began to fade. The candles burned lower, laughter became slurred, and under all of it, I felt a pressure I couldn't name. A sense that something was waiting, watching. The king hadn't left his throne, but I could feel his gaze move across the hall again. I didn't dare look up, yet my skin prickled as if his eyes had brushed my face. I held my breath until the feeling passed. Father called for more wine. Mother pretended not to see. Aurelia kept laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. When the servants brought another tray, I saw the reflection of the king in the goblets. Dark, unmoving, untouchable. The sight made my heart twist for reasons I didn't understand. He looked like a man surrounded by 100 voices and yet utterly alone. So was I. The music changed again, softer this time. Dancers filled the center of the hall, spinning beneath golden light. My sister joined them, her gown shimmering. Everyone clapped as she twirled, her hair flashing like sunlight. I stood by the wall, clutching the gloves in my hands, and tried to disappear. For a moment, the hall looked beautiful again. Light, color, movement. It almost felt like a storybook world. But then the laughter grew sharp, and the smell of wine grew bitter, and I remembered where I was. A place where people smiled too wide and lied too easily. A place ruled by a man who could break silence with a single glance. Chapter 5. The Gloves. The music in the royal hall shimmered like glass. Every note felt sharp enough to cut. Candles burned bright above our heads, hundreds of them, making the gold walls glow. Everyone sparkled, their jewels, their smiles, their pride. Everyone except me. I kept to the side, hands folded close, trying not to draw eyes. Father's laughter rang too loud. The smell of wine clung to him already. Mother's pearls clicked as she leaned toward Aurelia, whispering what to say, how to smile, how to charm. My sister didn't need lessons. She was born for this, the golden one, the one they believed would save us. I was only the shadow following behind. Father's back straightened whenever a noble passed. He bowed too deeply, smiled too long. I could see the sweat on his brow even under the powder. He hadn't worn real silk in years, but tonight he tried to act like the man he used to be. Every time someone looked his way, I could almost hear him thinking, "Notice me. Remember me." Mother kept her hand on Aurelia's arm, like she was leading her to the altar. "Breathe through your nose," she whispered. "Never through your mouth. It looks common." Aurelia nodded like an obedient doll, though her eyes glittered with pride. She looked like sunlight, pale gold gown, hair in shining curls, white gloves trimmed with lace. She was perfect, and she knew it. Then there was me, blue dress, plain braid, cream gloves that were soft but simple. They weren't fancy, but they were mine. Lyra's gloves. The music changed to a slow tune, and couples began to dance. I watched from the corner, pretending to study the table settings. Aurelia laughed as she spun in a noble's arms. Mother clapped softly, proud. Father leaned against the wall, goblet in hand, grinning like he belonged. For a moment I almost felt safe. Invisible, yes, but safe. Until I heard it. A small rip, followed by a gasp. Aurelia stopped mid-dance, staring down at her hand. Her right glove had torn straight across the seam. "Oh no," she whispered. "No, no, no." She rushed to Mother's side, eyes wide. "It's ruined." Mother's smile froze. "Maybe they won't notice." "They will," Aurelia hissed. "I can't be seen like this." Then her gaze turned, searching, and landed on me, on my hands. I saw the idea form before she spoke. Her eyes narrowed. "Give me yours," she said. I blinked. "What?" "Your gloves, quickly." She stretched out her hand like a queen giving an order. "Mine are torn." My stomach turned. "Aurelia, no, these were a gift." Her voice dropped lower, sharp like ice. "From who? That sickly friend of yours? She's dead. She doesn't need them." The words hit harder than she knew. I looked down at the gloves, cream-colored, soft, a little frayed at the edges. Lyra's hands had been warm the day she gave them to me. She'd smiled through her coughs. "Keep them," she'd said. "When the world feels cruel, remember someone once thought you were kind." I swallowed hard. "She was my friend," I said. "I can't give them away." Aurelia's face twisted. "You can't, or you won't." "I won't." Her tone turned louder, angrier. "Don't be selfish. It's just fabric." "It's all I have left of her." People nearby began to glance our way. Mother noticed the tension and hurried over. "What is this about?" Aurelia held up the torn glove. She won't give me hers. Mother's brows drew tight. Why not? Because they're sentimental, Aurelia mocked, as if anyone cares. Mother's sigh was sharp. For goodness sake, child, give them to her. No, I said quietly. They mean something. Mother's voice dropped, cold and warning. Do you want to ruin the evening, after all your father has done to get us here? I bit my lip. You mean what he lost to get us here? Her hand twitched. Watch your tone. Aurelia folded her arms. You always have to make everything about you, don't you? You love playing the victim. That's not what this is. Then prove it, she snapped. Help your family for once. I looked at her. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect lies, and felt a slow ache grow in my chest. I thought of Lyra again. Her laughter when I told her about my family. Her quiet words. You can't heal people who don't think they're broken. I tightened my hands into fists. I said no. For a moment, Aurelia just stared. Then her cheeks flushed red. You'll regret that, she whispered. She turned sharply and walked off, silk skirts brushing the marble like whispers of threat. Mother's eyes followed her, then snapped back to me. You never know when to hold your tongue. I only said the truth. She shook her head. The truth won't feed you. It won't fix your father's name. I don't want to fix it, I said before I could stop myself. He broke it himself. Mother's face went white. You ungrateful. But she didn't finish. Because father was walking toward us now, wine glass half empty and anger already spilling over. I felt the weight of his steps before he reached me. The smell of wine came first, bitter and sweet and heavy. He stopped right in front of me, towering. What did I hear? He asked, voice rough. You refused your sister? She asked for something that isn't hers. His jaw clenched. She is your sister. And I'm still a person. That made him blink, then scowl. Don't start with that tone. You think you're better than us because you read books and talk of mates and dreams? You've done nothing for this family. I didn't lose our standing, I whispered. You did. The words slipped out like a spark, and I knew I shouldn't have said them, because I saw the firelight in his eyes. He leaned close, his voice a hiss. You'd still have a home if you'd married who I told you to. You'd still have respect if you'd listened instead of chasing fairy tales. Fairy tales? I repeated softly. You mean love. Love, he barked a laugh. Love doesn't pay debts. Then maybe you shouldn't have made them. The sound he made wasn't words. It was a growl. Mother tried to pull him back, whispering out, people are watching, but he shook her off. Do as you're told, he said through his teeth. Give her the gloves. No. Do it. No, I said again, louder this time. You can't buy back your pride with my hands. For a long moment, no one moved. The music still played, but faintly, like from another world. A noble woman glanced our way and whispered to her friend. I felt the eyes on us, curious, amused, hungry for scandal. My throat tightened, but I didn't look down. I kept my chin high, even when father's breathing grew harsher. Mother's hand caught his sleeve. Not here. Please, not. But he turned on her too. Enough, woman. You think I'll let her humiliate us in front of everyone? Chapter 6. The slap heard around the hall. For a long moment no one moved. The music still played, faint, distant, like from another world. A noble woman whispered to her friend, both pretending not to stare. But everyone was watching. My throat felt tight, my palms damp against the soft fabric of my skirt. Father's breathing turned harsh, deep, almost like a growl. Mother's hand caught his sleeve. Not here, she hissed. Please not. But he jerked away from her touch, eyes blazing red with drink. Enough, woman. You think I'll let her humiliate us in front of everyone? He spat, turning on me. The words hit harder than the slap that hadn't yet come. Aurelia's painted smile wavered. "Father, quiet." His voice cracked through the air, sharp as breaking glass. He pointed at me, the gold rings on his fingers glinting in the light. "You stand there with that face, that pride, like you're better than your own family." I swallowed hard. "Father, I didn't what?" He stepped closer, the smell of wine heavy between us. "Didn't refuse your sister? Didn't make a fool of me in front of nobles who still remember what I used to be?" My voice trembled. "They were a gift. From my friend." He laughed, a cruel, broken sound that made even Aurelia flinch. "A dead friend? That's what you hold on to? You think a ghost's memory will feed this family?" The laughter around us died. I could feel eyes on my skin, curious, eager, waiting. "Father, please," Mother said under her breath. "Everyone's watching." He sneered. "Let them watch." He took another step toward me. His boots scraped the marble. The smell of sweat and liquor filled my nose. "Take them off," he ordered. My throat ached. "No." "What?" "No." I looked him straight in the eyes, though my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. "They're all I have left of her." His jaw clenched. Ungrateful girl. Mother tried to touch his arm again. "Darian, stop." "Stop?" His hand swung before she could finish. The slap landed across my cheek with a crack so loud it silenced the entire hall. For 1 second, everything froze. The torches flickered. A goblet slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. The pain came slow at first, like a burn that kept spreading. I tasted blood on my lip. My ears rang. He didn't see the shock in the crowd. He didn't care. "You worthless child," he shouted, his voice echoing through the golden hall. "You bring nothing but shame, always talking back, always thinking you're better than me." He raised his hand again. Mother grabbed it midair, desperate. "Please stop, people are watching." But he tore free, shouting, "Let them see what happens when a daughter forgets her place." I didn't move, didn't cry, didn't beg. The music had stopped. The nobles were statues, eyes wide, lips parted. Every breath in the room seemed to hold. The only sound was Father's, ragged, angry, unsteady. And then, beneath it, something else. A low rumble, a growl, deep, feral, vibrating through the marble floor. The sound came from the dais. The savage Alpha King was already standing. He hadn't moved fast. He didn't need to. His very presence made the torches dim. The air thickened until it felt like even the walls held their breath. He wasn't dressed like the others. No gold, no polished armor. Only a cloak of thick black fur thrown over his shoulders. The mark of his rank burned into the leather strap at his chest. His eyes, gods, those eyes, were bright amber, glinting like fire in the dark. Every noble who looked at him seemed to shrink smaller in their seats. Even the guards lowered their heads, because everyone knew, when the king's wolf stirred, silence followed. Chapter 7. The King Rises. The last echo of that slap still hung in the air. Father was frozen mid-breath, hand raised, eyes glassy with wine. The nobles whispered, small, horrified sounds that died when the heavy chair on the dais scraped back with a deep growl of wood and stone. Every sound vanished. The savage king rose. He wasn't dressed like the others in velvet or gold. A black fur cloak hung from his bare shoulders, his boots streaked with mud, his chest half exposed under a torn tunic. His body looked carved for war, his skin marked by old scars. When he breathed, the air seemed to move with him. His eyes flashed, amber, bright and alive, not polished, not human. Rage burned in them. Wolves along the walls whimpered, pressing their bellies to the floor. Even the torches bent lower, the flames shrinking from his power. He stepped from the dais. Each footfall echoed like thunder on marble. "You dare," he growled, voice rough as gravel. "Raise your hand in my hall?" Father stammered. Your Majesty, it was family discipline." "Discipline?" The word left the king's mouth like a snarl. "I smelled your rot the moment you entered this room." He moved closer. "All I see is a coward drunk on his own failure." The marble trembled beneath us. Light rippled under his skin, the wolf fighting to break free. His fangs flashed for an instant. The nobles gasped. Someone dropped a goblet. No one picked it up. He stopped an arm's length from Father. The scent of fear filled the air. My father's breath hitched, his knees buckling. The king's growl deepened until it shook the banners above. "You dare strike your blood in front of mine?" His voice turned to a roar that split the hall. The chandeliers swayed, dust raining from the rafters. "Do that one more time," he thundered. The sound tore through my bones. "Lay your filthy hands on her again, and I'll feed you your own eyes." The words crashed over the court like a storm. Mother screamed and covered her face. Aurelia hid behind her chair, trembling. Father collapsed to his knees, both hands shaking. The king's rage didn't fade. He towered over the man who had once ruled my life with cruelty and shame. His chest rose and fell like a creature barely leashed. "Look at her," he said, pointing at me. His voice dropped lower, but it cut deeper. "Look at what you call worthless and see the only shred of dignity left in your name." Father bowed his head, unable to speak. The nobles didn't dare breathe. Even the guards kept their eyes down. The king's breathing slowed, but his eyes stayed wild, gold and alive. "Touch her again," he said, quiet now, the kind of quiet that promised ruin. "And I'll make you wish you were born without hands." Father folded forward, trembling so hard the sound of his knees striking the floor echoed through the hall. The king turned his gaze on the guards. "Take their wine," he ordered. "They will not drink under my roof again." For a long time, no one dared speak. The torches hissed. The scent of wine and fear filled the air. Then the savage king's voice broke the silence, low, deep, and cold enough to make the chandeliers tremble. "You speak of honor," he said, each word sharp as a blade, "while drunk before your king." My father tried to lift his head, eyes wild, lips trembling. "Your Majesty, it was only discipline." "Discipline?" The king's voice rose like thunder. "You call this discipline?" He gestured toward me, my bruised cheek, my torn gloves, my shaking hands. "You raise your hand against blood you're sworn to protect?" The hall went still again. I saw nobles turn their faces away, ashamed to meet my eyes. Some whispered to one another, but none dared raise their voices above a breath. Father tried to crawl forward, knees scraping the marble. "Mercy, my king. I lost myself." "Lost yourself?" The king stepped down from the dais, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "No. You gave yourself to weakness. You let the bottle rule you, and you dared bring that stench into my hall." His growl rolled through the air, shaking the very banners above us. Father flinched back, mouth opening but no words coming out. Mother dropped beside him, her sobs loud and empty. "Please, Your Majesty, he didn't mean... We meant no harm." The king's eyes cut toward her, sharp as a wolf's bite. "No harm," he said softly. "Then why do I see a daughter bleeding and a mother pretending blindness?" She froze, the tears catching in her throat. The king turned to the guards, voice cracking through the air. "Remove their wine," he commanded. "They will not drink under my roof again." 2 guards hurried forward, seizing the half-empty bottles from the table and pouring them onto the marble. The smell of bitter grapes filled the room, thick and sour. The king's gaze returned to my parents. "You," he said to my father, "will leave this hall in silence. You will not speak my name again unless it is to beg forgiveness from the moon itself." Father bowed lower. The proud man I had known now nothing but a shaking heap of fine cloth and guilt. Then the king looked at my mother. "And you," he said, quieter now, almost too calm. "If you cannot teach respect, you will learn it by silence." She gasped softly, pressing a hand to her chest. The word struck her harder than any slap. Around us, the nobles watched, scandal and fear mixing in their eyes. I could feel the whispers spreading like wind. Names, accusations, stories that would follow my family forever. The king lifted his head to the crowd. His voice echoed through the grand hall. "Let this hall remember, cruelty is not strength." A hush swept over everyone. Even the ones who had sneered at me before now looked away, ashamed. Father's former allies, men who had once toasted him and gambled at his side, quietly stepped back into the crowd. None of them reached to help him. None of them even met his eyes. Our family name began to die right there, beneath the glittering chandeliers. I stood trembling, not from fear, but from something stranger. Relief. Disbelief. For the first time in my life, someone had stood between me and the people who were supposed to protect me. The king turned to go, but before he climbed the dais again, his eyes found mine. His voice softened, but it carried all the weight of a promise. "No one will touch you again," he said. I couldn't breathe, couldn't even nod. My heart thudded so loud it drowned the whispers. Then he faced the court one last time. "Let the next man who strikes his blood remember what happened here tonight." He strode back to his seat. The fur of his cloak dragged behind him like a dark tide, the light of the torches catching on it like fire. The guards stepped forward and led my parents away. Mother wept. Father stumbled, still half drunk, eyes empty of the pride that had once ruled our home. The doors shut behind them with a heavy thud that echoed through the hall. The feast was over. No one dared raise a cup or speak. Every noble sat frozen, the smell of spilled wine still sharp in the air. And I stood in the middle of it all, the mark of his justice still hanging like smoke around me. The savage king had destroyed my father's pride with a few words, and yet, as I looked up at him on the throne, I realized something terrifying. He hadn't done it for power. He had done it for me. Chapter 8. The Command of Silence. The doors closed behind my parents with a heavy thud that seemed to shake the breath from the room. No one moved. Not a servant. Not a noble. Not even me. The savage king still stood where he had last spoken, half in shadow, the fur around his shoulders rising and falling with each slow breath. The torchlight caught the faint gleam of his eyes, the same amber fire that had burned through my father's pride moments ago. For a long moment, all I could hear was the echo of my own pulse. Then his gaze turned, away from them, onto me. "Everyone," he said, his voice rough but low now. "Out." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The command moved through the room like a gust of wind, swift, cold, absolute. Chairs scraped, dresses rustled, boots shuffled. No one argued. No one even dared look back. The nobles scattered like frightened birds, whispering as they went, their perfume and fear trailing after them. Servants followed quickly, bowing so low they nearly touched the floor. Even the guards hesitated only a breath before retreating toward the great doors. When the last of them had gone, only my parents remained at the far end of the hall. My father was pale, eyes unfocused, mouth open as if he meant to speak. My mother clutched his arm, her tears streaking her powdered face. He took one unsteady step forward. "Your Majesty, I—" The king didn't move, didn't raise his voice. He only looked at him. That was enough. The words died in my father's throat. He stumbled back, nodding like a fool, before the guards ushered them both out into the corridor. The great doors swung closed, sealing them away. Silence. The air felt thicker once we were alone. The torches hissed in the stillness, throwing restless shadows across the walls. I could hear the distant rumble of thunder beyond the palace windows, soft and far, like a storm trying to crawl closer. I swallowed hard. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I wanted to speak, to thank him, to ask him why. But the words tangled on my tongue. He turned away first, walking toward the center of the hall where the light from the chandeliers hit the marble floor. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "I'm fine." My voice didn't sound fine. He faced me again. His expression was unreadable. Part anger, part something else, something heavier. "No one," he said, his tone gentling just a little, "should endure that." I stared at him, unable to answer. For years, I had dreamed of someone standing up for me. I had imagined kindness, maybe justice, but never this. Never a man who could stop an entire court with a single roar. He stepped closer, slow enough that I didn't flinch. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. I blinked. "Here? In the palace?" He nodded once. "Under my protection." My heart stuttered. "Your Majesty, that isn't proper. People will talk. This is not a request." The words hit softly but left no space for argument. His tone was final. The same tone he'd used to crush my father's defiance, now turned toward me, but not in anger. It was something like concern, though he tried to hide it. He gestured toward one of the far doors leading off the grand hall. "The west chamber is empty. You'll rest there. I'll have a maid bring you what you need." I nodded slowly, the reality settling over me like a strange dream. He didn't look away. "You're safe here," he said. I didn't know what to say to that. Safety was a word that had never belonged to me. He turned, heading back toward the dais. The fur around his shoulders caught the torchlight, glowing faintly gold at the edges. The thunder outside rolled again, closer this time. At the doorway, I paused. "Why did you help me?" I whispered. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Because I could," he said, "and because no one else did." The room felt smaller then, the air heavy with something unspoken. He glanced over his shoulder once more, eyes meeting mine. "Rest," he said. "The night will keep its silence while you do." And just like that, he was gone, disappearing through a side arch, leaving the echo of his presence hanging in the dim golden air. I stood for a long while, alone beneath the high torches, staring at the door he'd vanished through. Outside, the storm finally broke. Thunder rolled across the sky, but for the first time in my life, the sound didn't frighten me. It sounded like protection, loud, certain, and fierce. I turned toward the west chamber. My steps were unsteady, but lighter than they had been when I entered this cursed hall. Behind me, the king's words lingered. No one should endure that. For the first time, I almost believed him. Chapter 9. The King's Command. The great hall was silent again. The storm outside had quieted, but something far stronger still lived in the air between us. The savage king stood at the center of it, his back to me, his breath steady but heavy, as if he were holding something dangerous inside himself. The fur around his shoulders rose and fell with each inhale, his jaw clenched tight. He moved without sound, only the faint scrape of his boots across marble marking his path. He passed by me, so close that I caught the scent of iron on his skin. Yet he didn't speak. He didn't even look my way. He stopped beside the table where my father had been drinking. A shattered goblet lay there, wine spilled across the floor in dark rivers. The red liquid caught the torchlight, gleaming like blood. The king crouched slowly, one knee to the ground, and pressed his thumb to the puddle. For a moment, he just stared at it. That tiny streak of red across his skin, before wiping it away on the fur at his wrist. His face hardened, but something in his eyes shifted. "Sit," he said quietly. The single word filled the room. Not a shout, not a demand, just a command that carried weight. I sat on the nearest bench without a thought, my pulse loud in my ears. My body obeyed before my mind could decide whether I was his guest or his prisoner. He stood again, towering but still trembling slightly. Rage still clung to him like smoke. "You will not leave the palace tonight," he said, his voice low but firm. My fingers twisted in my lap. "Your Majesty, please, I can't stay here. If anyone sees—" He turned sharply. "Let them see." The words cut through the air. For a moment, I saw the wolf in him again, the part that did not ask, did not explain, only ruled. Then his voice lowered, softer, but no less certain. "Let them gossip. You belong to no one's cruelty now." The words didn't sound like kindness. Not exactly. They sounded like law, as though he'd carved them into the marble itself. Still, something flickered behind them, something that almost looked like guilt, or restraint. He turned his face away before I could be sure. His hand flexed once, the knuckles pale against the fur. "I don't need protection," I murmured. He glanced back at me, his eyes sharp. "You do. You just never had it before." That silenced me. He walked to the far end of the hall again, to the dais where his chair waited. For a long moment, he stood behind it, both hands resting on the carved arms, his head bowed. The firelight painted shadows across his face, outlining the scars on his temple, the curve of his mouth, the marks of someone who had seen too much war and carried all of it alone. "People think power means control," he said quietly, as if speaking more to himself than to me. "They forget it's restraint that costs the most." I didn't understand all of it, but I could hear the weight in his voice. He exhaled slowly and straightened again, the storm in him finally easing. When he looked at me, it was no longer the same gaze that had terrified the court. It was steadier, searching, like he was seeing not who I was, but what had been done to me. A door opened at the edge of the hall, and a young maid appeared, her head bowed. "Take her to the west chamber," the king said. "See that she's given food and rest." The maid nodded quickly. Before she could lead me away, he spoke again, not loud but clear enough to linger in my bones. "Tomorrow they'll talk," he said. "Let them. But when they do, make sure they use the word fear when they speak my name, and respect when they speak yours." I rose, unsure if my legs would hold. As the maid led me toward the door, I looked back once more. He was still there, one hand gripping the edge of his throne, the other resting over the spot on his chest where his heart beat, as if reminding himself it still did. I realized then that his rage hadn't just been for me. It was for something older, something that haunted him long before I arrived. And though I didn't understand why, I suddenly wanted to know what had made a man so feared capable of such fierce, trembling mercy. Chapter 10. Behind closed doors. The corridors were long and dark. Torches flickered low along the stone walls, their light bending and breaking over carvings of wolves frozen in mid-snarl. The sound of our footsteps echoed between the arches, his heavy, mine light and unsure. He didn't speak, neither did I. He didn't have to. The air itself seemed to follow his will. Guards at the end of each hallway straightened the moment they saw him, heads bowing, eyes to the floor. Servants vanished into corners like frightened birds. None dared to ask who I was or why the king himself was leading me through the inner halls of his fortress. I walked a few paces behind him, staring at the way his cloak moved, the black fur catching the firelight, each step purposeful, measured. He looked carved from shadow, from something ancient and restless that did not belong to this world of gold and marble. When we reached a tall iron door guarded by 2 sentinels, he stopped. "Open it," he ordered. The guards obeyed at once. The hinges groaned, and warm light spilled out. The room beyond was vast, larger than the entire house I'd grown up in. The walls were carved with running wolves, their eyes set with faint stones that shimmered like frost. A great hearth burned at the far end, the fire snapping low and steady. He stepped aside and motioned for me to enter. "You'll sleep here," he said. His voice was rough again, but not cruel. "No one enters without my order." I hesitated at the threshold. "Your Majesty, Do not argue," he said. "You're under my protection. That's not up for question." I stepped in. The air smelled of cedar and smoke, and for the first time in what felt like forever, warmth touched my skin. He followed only a few steps, enough for the light to fall across his face. It softened him somehow. Without the crown, without the roar, he looked almost human. His eyes were still fierce, but they were ringed with exhaustion, the kind that lives deeper than sleep. "Thank you," I whispered. The words slipped out before I could stop them. He turned his head just slightly. Don't thank me," he said. His tone wasn't sharp, but it carried weight. I did not do it for gratitude. The fire popped. Shadows danced over the fur draped on his shoulders, moving like ghosts. I stood there, twisting my fingers, searching for something to say that wouldn't sound foolish. Finally, I asked the question that had burned in me since the hall. "Why did you stop him?" He went very still. For a long moment, the only sound was the fire. Then he exhaled, slow and rough, and his voice dropped lower. "Because I've seen what men like that do," he said. "And I've buried enough of them." His words hung there, heavy as stone. He didn't look at me when he said it. His gaze was fixed on the flames, as if he saw something there, something long gone but still burning. I wanted to ask what he meant, but something told me not to. There was grief in that silence. And grief, I knew, was a language you didn't interrupt. He stepped back toward the door. "Rest," he said. "The guards outside will keep watch." He reached for the handle but paused, as if weighing whether to add something more. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. His eyes met mine, and I saw, not the monster the court feared, not the alpha who commanded armies, but a man who carried his rage like armor because he'd forgotten how to carry anything else. Then the moment was gone. The door shut behind him with a dull thud, and I was alone. I crossed to the fire and sank onto the rug, pulling my knees close. My cheeks still ached where Father had struck me, but it wasn't the pain I felt most, it was the confusion. The king's words echoed again in my mind. "Because I've seen what men like that do." What had he seen? What had he lost? The room was too large, too still. The carvings of wolves seemed to watch me from the walls. I stared back at them until the flames blurred. He was supposed to be a beast, a monster born of war and fury. Yet tonight, the savage had been the only one who stopped the cruelty. And that thought, impossible, wild, dangerous, warmed me more than the fire ever could. Chapter 11. The morning after. When I woke, the world was quiet. Soft gray light spilled through the tall windows, cutting across the room in gentle stripes. The fire had gone down to embers, and the furs beside me still held the faintest trace of his scent. Smoke. Something sharper, like iron and rain. For a moment I forgot where I was. Then the memories returned. The hall, the slap, the roar that shattered the night. The savage king. The man who stopped my father. The man who said I would stay under his protection. My heart beat unevenly as the first horns of dawn sounded across the city, low and distant, calling the palace to court. I sat up slowly. My cheek still throbbed, but the bruising warmth of it was fading. My palms brushed against the soft rug, so unlike the cold stone of home. I wasn't used to comfort. It made me nervous. When I stepped toward the window, the courtyard below was already alive with motion. Guards changing shifts, servants carrying trays, banners of deep crimson fluttering against the pale morning sky. The palace pulsed like a living heart, steady and untouchable. And somewhere within it, he was awake. A knock came at the door. "Enter," I said softly. A young maid slipped in, nervous, eyes lowered. "His Majesty requests your presence in the great breakfast hall." My stomach tightened. "Now?" Yes, my lady. My lady. No one had ever called me that before. I dressed in the simple gown folded neatly by the fire, not silk, not velvet, but clean and soft. Someone had chosen it for me. Someone had thought of that detail. As the maid led me through the halls, I caught the whispers before I saw the faces. Is that her? The one the king protected? They say he roared so loud the windows cracked. No one's ever survived his anger before. And now she's in his guest wing? Each word followed me like smoke. Some voices were pitying, others curious, and a few sharp with jealousy. We reached the grand hall. The light there was blinding. Hundreds of candles reflected in mirrors and polished floors. Long tables stretched from end to end, filled with nobles in silks and soldiers in armor. Trays of food gleamed under silver lids. Every head turned when I entered. The sound of my footsteps felt deafening. The servants paused mid-step. The nobles pretended to continue eating, but their eyes flicked up every few seconds, studying me like a strange new animal. I found a place at the edge of the hall, far from the dais where the king's chair stood empty. And then, the doors opened. He entered. The savage Alpha King, still draped in his dark fur cloak, still untamed in every line of his form. The court straightened at once, spines stiff, voices cut short. He didn't wear a crown, but he didn't need one. The air itself obeyed him. His gaze swept the room once. When it reached me, it didn't linger long, just a single heartbeat of acknowledgement. But that single look was enough to silence every whisper in the hall. He walked to the high table and sat. No announcement, no speech, just presence. The servants began to move again, pouring wine, bringing bread, refilling goblets. I could barely touch my food. My hands were steady, but my insides felt twisted, uncertain. When I dared a glance toward him, he was speaking quietly to one of his generals, his jaw set, his eyes colder now. The king again, not the man who had looked at me by firelight. But when my father rose from the lower table, I felt the shift before anyone else did. He stumbled forward, still pale from the night before, his face drawn, his eyes desperate. "Your Majesty," he began. "Please, my family." A guard stepped in front of him. "You were not summoned." He tried to push past. "She is my daughter." The king's voice cut across the room like a blade. "Guards." 2 soldiers moved in at once, seizing father by the arms. Mother's voice trembled behind him. "Your Majesty, we only—" Silence. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. The command rolled through the room like thunder buried under ice. Everyone froze. Even the torches seemed to flicker lower. Then he turned slightly toward the table, not to them, but to all of us. His voice was calm now, the kind of calm that made my heart stop. "Her name," he said, "is not to be spoken with insult again." The silence deepened. "That is law." No one dared breathe. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. The meaning sank into me all the same, cold and strange and terrifying. My father's face drained of color. He tried to speak again, but the guards dragged him back toward the lower end of the hall. Mother buried her face in her hands. Aurelia sat motionless, her beauty turned ghostly under the weight of shame. The king resumed eating, as though nothing had happened. And the rest of the hall followed his lead, though every movement, every whisper, carried a different kind of fear now. Not of scandal, but of him. I sat still, my pulse echoing in my ears. He hadn't even looked at me again, not once, but his words wrapped around me like armor I hadn't asked for. When the meal ended, I rose quietly, unsure where to go. No one stopped me. The nobles stepped aside as I passed, their eyes lowered, some in respect, some in resentment. Outside, the morning sun was bright, sharp against the cold stone. I stopped by the balcony overlooking the courtyard. Soldiers trained below, their movements disciplined and fierce. The sound of swords clashing filled the air. For the first time in my life, No one could touch me. For the first time, I was safe. And yet, I was afraid. Because safety born from fear is still a cage, even if its bars are made of gold. The king had said I belonged to no one's cruelty now. But the truth was I belonged to his word, and that was something far heavier to carry. Chapter 12. The Whispers of the Palace. The morning after the king's command, the palace felt like it was holding its breath. Every hallway seemed to listen. The marble floors gleamed too brightly, the torches burned too still, as if even the fire feared to move. Servants carried trays and scrolls with their heads bowed low, whispering behind sleeves, terrified to say my name out loud. I had become something strange overnight, both a legend and a warning. The girl the savage king defended in front of the entire court. Some said it with awe, others with disgust. Every corridor I walked through fell silent. Some bowed, out of fear or respect. I could never tell which. Others turned away, sneering behind their polished manners. Their stares clung to me like dust. When I passed the long gallery, two maidens curtsied too quickly, their eyes wide. One murmured, "That's her," before the other hissed, "Quiet. Do you want to lose your tongue?" The sound followed me down the hall, fading like a curse. I didn't return their looks. I didn't have the strength to. My mind still swirled with what had happened. The king's roar, the trembling of my father's knees, the hush that swallowed the hall. I'd been saved and condemned in the same night. Now, I lived in his world, the savage king's world, where mercy and violence wore the same face. The guards at every archway watched me with unreadable eyes. I wondered what they saw. A guest? A captive? A woman under protection or under command? I couldn't tell anymore. When I reached the great staircase, a maid paused and whispered, "He hasn't called for her yet." Her companion shook her head. "He doesn't need to. She's already his to protect." Their words made my chest tighten. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I didn't miss his presence. Not the sound of his boots on the marble. Not the heavy silence that came with him. Not the storm that lived in his voice. And yet, when I heard his voice echo faintly through the halls, low, commanding, distant, my hands trembled. Later that afternoon, I stood by the balcony overlooking the courtyard. The snow had melted overnight, and the air carried the scent of cold stone. Below, soldiers trained in the yard, their movements sharp and disciplined. And there, in the middle of them, he stood. The king. He wasn't wearing his crown or his furs, only a black shirt rolled to the elbows, his skin glinting with sweat under the pale sun. He moved like a shadow with a heartbeat, power in every step, danger in every breath. When one soldier stumbled, his voice boomed across the yard. Again. The man obeyed instantly, fear mixing with respect. From where I stood, he didn't see me, but I watched him, the man who had silenced an entire court with a single roar, the man who had looked at me and said, "You belong to no one's cruelty now." That sentence haunted me. He didn't summon me that day, yet his presence filled the air. I could feel him in the rhythm of the guards, in the tension of the halls, in the steady echo of boots passing under my chamber door long after dark. When I finally lay in bed that night, I couldn't sleep. The fire had burned low, and the shadows danced along the walls like restless spirits. My fingers brushed against the faint bruise on my cheek, the one his wrath had stopped from deepening. My lips trembled, and I whispered into the empty room, "Why me?" The silence had no answer, but deep in the palace I heard it. The distant growl of a wolf echoing through the corridors. It was low, rough, and full of grief. Somehow, I knew it was him. And though I told myself not to care, I pulled the blanket tighter and listened until it faded. Because even if the world called him savage, that sound didn't frighten me. It comforted me. Chapter 13. The Beast Behind the Throne. That night I dreamed of his voice again, not the roar that silenced my father, not the growl that made nobles shake, but the low, rough whisper that had said, "No one should endure that." It came to me through the darkness like a memory carried by wind. In the dream I was standing in the same grand hall, the torches dim, the marble cracked beneath my feet. The king's figure moved through the shadows, a blur of fur and fury. Yet when he spoke, it wasn't anger I heard. It was sorrow. I woke before dawn, my heart pounding so fast I thought I'd been running. The fire in my room had gone out, but the words still burned in my chest. No one should endure that. For a long while I sat upright in bed, watching the pale morning light creep through the tall windows. The palace was silent. Too silent. Only the faint howl of wind through the stone halls reminded me I wasn't dreaming anymore. Days began to pass like that, slow, cold, and careful. The rhythm of palace life moved around me like clockwork. Every dawn, horns sounded from the east towers. Every dusk, guards changed posts beneath the iron gates. Servants bowed when I walked by, not out of respect but because they didn't know what else to do. I was the king's protected one, the girl no one dared to touch or speak to. And him? The savage Alpha King ruled as he always did, with precision so sharp it cut the air itself. His decrees thundered through the council halls. His judgments were swift, his punishments cruel, but never unjust. I'd sometimes glimpse him from afar, standing at the war table, his hand pressed to a map, his voice echoing low and steady as if the entire world bent to listen. The court feared him. The guards worshipped him. Even the council, old men with silver hair and shaking hands, didn't dare speak unless spoken to. But there was something else under all that command, something no one else seemed to notice. When his gaze swept over the court, I saw the exhaustion hiding behind it. When he clenched his jaw, I caught the shadow of pain that lingered there. He was not just a beast. He was a man drowning inside his own legend. One afternoon, fate decided to test my courage. I had been walking through one of the outer corridors, a long hall of stone carved with wolves and moons, when I saw him. He was coming from the war chamber, his steps heavy, his hair slightly damp with sweat. The scent of steel and storm seemed to follow him. For a heartbeat, I froze. He looked like the stories said he would, wild, unbending, untamed. His cloak hung half open, revealing scars that trailed along his collarbone like forgotten battles. He stopped when he saw me. The corridor stretched between us, silent except for the faint crackle of torchlight. His gaze swept over me, not soft, not cruel, just seeing. My breath caught. I wanted to look away, but his presence was magnetic, like the air itself bowed to him. Then his voice broke the silence. "Has anyone bothered you?" The question startled me. My lips parted before I could think. "No, Your Majesty." Something flickered behind his eyes, not relief exactly, but something close. A quiet exhale, heavy with meaning. "Good," he said, his tone dropping lower. Then, almost to himself, "You've been confined too long." My heart thudded. I didn't want to cause trouble. He took a slow step closer, and the light caught the gold rings around his irises. "You are not trouble." The words came out like a growl, but softer. "Explore the castle. Learn its halls. You are not a prisoner here." I hesitated, unsure if it was truly permission or a warning. Before I could speak, he turned his head toward a maid standing nearby, a thin girl with trembling hands clutching a tray. "Come here," he ordered. The girl nearly dropped the tray as she stumbled forward, bowing so low her forehead almost brushed the floor. "Ensure she has everything she asks for," the king said, his voice calm but heavy with command. "If she lacks anything," his eyes sharpened, "you will answer to me." The maid's eyes went wide. "Yes, Your Majesty." I wanted to say thank you, but the words tangled in my throat. He was already turning away, his heavy fur cloak brushing against the stone floor. I watched him go, his figure fading into the corridor's dark end, leaving silence in his wake. For the rest of the day, his voice wouldn't leave me. It echoed in my mind, the way he said, "You are not a prisoner here," like it was meant for someone else, maybe even for himself. That evening, the same maid came to my chamber carrying a tray of food. She placed it carefully on the table and turned to leave, but I stopped her. "Wait," I said softly. "Tell me, what kind of man is he?" She froze. "His Majesty?" I nodded. Her eyes darted toward the door before she answered in a whisper. "He's a good man, my lady, but sometimes he hides it behind his savagery." I frowned. "Hides it?" She looked down at her hands. "He must. To rule this kingdom, one must be both the shield and the sword. But—" She hesitated, lowering her voice. "He's not what people say. He's never been unfair. I've worked here 3 years and I've never seen him be partial to anyone. He treats everyone the same, servant or noble. And when my mother was sick last winter," her voice trembled slightly, "he sent the royal physician to tend to her. The best one. I could never have afforded that." I stared at her. "He did that?" She nodded quickly. "He never speaks of kindness, but he does it. He makes sure no one goes hungry, that soldiers' children learn to read, that widows have coin for firewood. He can be cruel when he must, but never without reason. Everyone here loves and respects him, even if they tremble when he walks by." Her words sank deep. I could see the truth in her eyes. This wasn't the loyalty of fear. It was the loyalty of someone who had seen mercy beneath the claws. I whispered, "Thank you." She gave a quick nod and hurried out, leaving me in the quiet glow of the firelight. I sat by the window, the plate untouched. The moonlight spilled across the floor, cool and silver. Somewhere in the palace below, I heard the clang of steel, a training ground perhaps, or the echo of discipline. And I thought of him, the monster the world feared, the man who had silenced an entire court with a single roar, the one who had looked at me and said, "You belong to no one's cruelty now." My eyes stung. I didn't know if it was sadness or something else, something warmer, more dangerous. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed again. This time I wasn't in the hall or the court. I was standing on a quiet hill, the wind brushing through my hair. He stood beside me, looking out at a kingdom bathed in moonlight. There was no crown on his head, no fury in his eyes, only peace, fleeting, fragile, and real. He turned to me, his voice low and rough. No one should endure that. I woke before dawn again, my heart pounding, my palms pressed to my chest, and in that still, early silence, I realized something that frightened me more than any roar ever could. The savage Alpha King, the beast they all feared, might be the only one who had ever truly protected me. Chapter 14. The Law of the Savage King. By the week's end, the palace was humming again, but differently now. The whispers hadn't stopped. They had only changed shape. Everywhere I went, I could feel them circling like invisible threads, weaving stories about the girl the king had spared and the reason why. She's his new plaything. No, they say he protects her because she's cursed. Or maybe, a servant's voice hushed to a whisper, maybe he sees something in her that reminds him of himself. I pretended not to hear, but every word clung to me. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself their gossip meant nothing. But the truth was, their eyes burned, not with curiosity, but envy. The nobles began to gather again for council dinners. Long, tense affairs where alliances were forged with smiles and broken with a single look. I wasn't supposed to be there, yet the king never sent me away when I wandered too close. He allowed it, my quiet presence near the back of the hall, unseen but not hidden. The nobles bowed to him, of course, but they couldn't hide their resentment. I saw it in the way they exchanged glances when he entered. They feared his rule, yes, but they also feared what they could not predict. Mercy. And that was what I had become to them. A symbol of mercy in a palace built on fear. The savage king continued his rulings as always. Harsh, exact, but strangely fair. His voice echoed through the hall like thunder rolling across the mountains. Each word was law. Each pause carried weight. When he spoke, even the chandeliers seemed to hold still. That night, I attended one of those councils from the far end of the table. I told myself I was just observing, but I saw the way their eyes cut toward me like knives whenever his gaze lingered near my direction. An older nobleman, Lord Careth, known for his arrogance, had been drinking too freely. His words slurred, his smirk ugly. "Your Majesty," he said, laughter dripping from his tone. "It seems the palace is brighter these days. Perhaps it's because of your new ornament." The room went still. No one breathed. The king didn't look up right away. He simply turned the knife in his hand, slow, deliberate, as if weighing its edge. Then, with a sound sharp as lightning, he slammed it into the table between the man's fingers. The noble froze. The king's voice was quiet, too quiet. "Her name will never again be spoken with insult, by any man who wishes to keep his tongue." Every word landed like a strike. No one dared move. The noble's face went pale as snow. Forgive me, Your Majesty, But the king had already turned his gaze away, dismissing him like an insect. The hall exhaled as one, and the fear returned, thicker than ever. After the council dispersed, I stayed behind, pretending to linger near the windows. But my heart was still racing. He was standing at the far end of the room, staring at the knife he'd left buried in the table. His hands flexed once, twice before he pulled it free. I took a breath and whispered, "You didn't have to do that." He didn't turn. "Didn't I? You made them fear you more." He finally looked over his shoulder. His expression was unreadable. Fear keeps them alive. I took a step closer. "And you? What about me? Who keeps you alive?" For a long moment, the only sound was the fire crackling in the hearth. Then he laughed, low and humorless. "No one," he said, his eyes glinting faintly. "But I suppose that's the price of peace." He started to walk past me, but then stopped, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body, the faint scent of smoke clinging to him. "Do not thank me for defending you," he said quietly. "They forget too easily what fear feels like." His tone was steady, but there was something fractured beneath it, something tired. Later that night I found him again, though not on purpose. The corridors were dim, lit only by the torches flickering along the stone walls. I'd been restless, wandering when I caught sight of him through an open doorway. The war chamber. He was sitting at the long table covered with maps, a half-empty goblet in hand. His furs were gone, his shirt unlaced at the collar, exposing the line of his throat. For the first time he looked human. Not a king, not a beast, just a man staring at ghosts. I hesitated in the doorway, but he didn't tell me to leave. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without looking up. I shook my head. "Neither could you." He gave a faint, tired smirk. "The crown doesn't rest even when I do." I moved closer, my fingers brushing the edge of the map. "Do you ever wish you could take it off?" He looked up then, really looked. His eyes were steady, sharp, but there was a flicker of something softer underneath. "Every day." The silence stretched between us like something fragile. I wanted to fill it, and before I knew it, the words tumbled out. "Why do they call you the Savage King?" He leaned back in his chair. "Because I stopped pretending to be what they wanted." "Were you always this way?" He studied me for a long moment, then shook his head. "No. Once I believed in peace without fear, but peace built on trust alone dies fast. I learned that the hard way. Did you ever love someone before? I asked before I could stop myself. Something flickered across his face. Not anger, not sadness, but a memory. Yes, he said simply. And I buried her. I didn't ask more. The weight in his voice said enough. He stared at the map again, tracing a finger over the border lines. War doesn't just take land. It takes names, faces, laughter. It leaves only the parts that can fight. Before I could answer, the door burst open. His chief guard entered, tall, broad, and breathless. Your Majesty, urgent news from the northern borders. The king stood immediately, the softness gone, replaced by steel. Speak. The guard hesitated, glancing at me. Say it, the king ordered. There's unrest among the allied packs. A border patrol has gone missing. Scouts fear a breach. His jaw tightened. Ready my counsel. I'll address it at dawn. The guard bowed and left as quickly as he came. The king exhaled, long and heavy, then turned to me. The warmth that had flickered between us was gone, swallowed by duty. We'll continue this later, he said, voice clipped but quieter than before. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the war chamber, staring at the maps that still smelled faintly of smoke and him. I stood there for a long time, my thoughts tangled, my heart unsteady. Because now I knew something I hadn't before. Beneath all his savagery, beneath the roar and command, there was a man still trying to carry a crown that had broken him long ago. And though I didn't know what it meant yet, I knew one thing for certain. The world called him savage, but I was beginning to see the truth. He was human, and that made him even more dangerous. Chapter 15. The distance between. The days began to melt together, soft light, cold corridors, the echo of boots and silence. The palace lived and breathed around me, yet I could no longer tell where I fit within its rhythm. I saw him almost every day, and yet it felt like I hadn't truly seen him at all. He had become a shadow of himself, always moving, always busy, always unreachable. The council hall, the war chamber, the training yard, each one swallowed him whole. When he passed through the halls, the air shifted. Guards bowed, servants froze, and I just stood there, a breath too late, a heartbeat too far. Still, I tried. The first morning I brought him tea. He was in the council room, surrounded by scrolls and the low murmur of his advisors. The scent of ink and steel filled the air. I set the cup beside him carefully, my fingers trembling. He didn't look up. Thank you. Just 2 words. Polite, distant, final. The next day I tried again. I left a folded note on his desk in the war chamber, nothing more than a simple line. You should rest. That evening when I returned, the note was gone. So I began to time my steps to his. I learned the hour he passed the inner courtyard, the rhythm of his stride echoing between the marble columns. Sometimes I'd be there, pretending to watch the fountains. Sometimes he'd pause just for a heartbeat, as if he might speak. And then he'd continue on, the wind of his cloak brushing past like the ghost of a touch. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't cold. He was careful. And that somehow hurt more. It was like watching someone build a wall 1 stone at a time, knowing each stone was made of guilt. Once I caught his gaze across the dining hall. He had just dismissed a trembling envoy, his jaw tight with exhaustion. Our eyes met for a second, long enough for me to see something flicker there. Regret. Pain. Maybe even longing. But then he blinked it away and turned back to his meal. At night, I sat by the window, staring down at the torch-lit courtyards below. I could see him sometimes, pacing along the training grounds alone. No guards, no audience, just him, striking at invisible enemies. His movements were sharp, precise, violent, and yet empty. As though he wasn't fighting anyone out there. He was fighting himself. I pressed my hand to the glass. Why won't you let me in?" The moon gave no answer. The next morning, I gathered my courage and went to the throne room. He was there, cloaked in shadow and duty, speaking with his generals. I waited until the last one bowed and left before I stepped forward. "My king," I said softly. He froze. Not at the title, at my voice. "I only wanted to ask if—" "You shouldn't be here," he said quickly. Not unkind, but final. I swallowed hard. "Then where should I be?" His eyes closed for a second. "Safe." "That's not an answer." He stood, his full height casting me in shadow. "It's the only one I can give." There it was. That tone again. Not anger, not pride. Fear. Not of me, but of himself. I stepped closer, heart pounding. "I'm not afraid of you." His voice dropped, lower, darker. "Because I know what's brewing inside that little heart of yours, and you should think twice about that feeling." My breath caught. What feeling? His jaw worked. Love. The word fell between us like a blade. I blinked up at him. "You think I love you?" "I think you're too kind for your own good," he said harshly. "And if you do, if you even start to, you should stop before it destroys you. I am not the man you want me to be." I stepped closer still, my fingers trembling but my chin high. "I don't even know what I feel yet. But if it is love—" My voice sharpened. "You will not tell me what to do with it." His head snapped toward me, eyes blazing. For an instant I thought I had gone too far. His power rolled off him in a wave so strong I actually shifted back a step. Then, slowly, he smiled. A dark, crooked, dangerous smile. "Fierce little wolf," he murmured. "You've got teeth after all." My heart hammered against my ribs. His smile faded as quickly as it had come, but the echo of it remained in his eyes. For a moment, the air between us throbbed, sharp, alive, fragile. I could see his pulse at his throat, could see how tightly his jaw was locked, and then before I could speak again, he turned away. "Go," he said quietly, "before I forget what mercy feels like." I didn't move. Not until he did. He turned his back, walked toward the dais, and the sound of his boots echoed across the floor. Heavy, final, echoing in my chest long after he was gone. I left the hall with my hands shaking and my heart in pieces. Not because he had pushed me away, but because I finally understood why. The walls he built weren't made of pride or cruelty. They were made of fear. Fear of what he might become if he let me close. And though it hurt to admit it, I knew this too. The more he tried to protect me from himself, the more I belonged to him already. Chapter 16. Moonlight and Confession. The council chamber had emptied hours ago, but its echoes still clung to me. Their sneers, their murmurs, the shock that I had dared to speak for him. I hadn't planned to. The words had spilled out on their own, born from something fierce and trembling inside me. By the time the moon rose high over the palace, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the look in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even something softer, when I defended him. So I went to the balcony, chasing air, chasing quiet, chasing something I couldn't name. The city stretched out below, silver and still, its rooftops shining like mirrors under the moon. The wind tangled through my hair, cool and restless. For once I felt free, and yet trapped by my own thoughts. That's when I sensed him. The air shifted, the way it always did before he appeared, heavier, charged, alive. I turned, and there he was, stepping from the shadows of the doorway. No crown, no guards, just the man himself, the savage king, cloaked in fur, his eyes reflecting the moonlight like molten gold. He said nothing at first. He only stood beside me, staring out at the city he ruled and perhaps the ghosts that ruled him. "I heard what you said," he murmured, after a long pause, voice low and rough. "Before the council." I looked down, fingers tightening on the stone railing. I shouldn't have. You should have, he interrupted. His tone was flat but not cold. They needed reminding. Reminding of what? I asked quietly. That you're feared? That no one dares question you? His eyes flicked toward me. That fear keeps them alive. I frowned. That sounds like something my father would say. He went still. Your father? Yes. My voice softened but didn't waver. He used to tell me fear was the only way to keep control. That cruelty wasn't wrong if it made others obey. His gaze darkened. Then he was a man who understood power. I turned sharply toward him. No, I said. He was a man who destroyed everything he loved and then called it strength. He exhaled, slow and deliberate. You don't understand. My cruelty is not his. It's not empty. Every harsh decision I make keeps this kingdom standing. I do what I must, not what I want. Cruelty is still cruelty, I said, my voice rising. Even if you code it in reason. His jaw tightened. You think this realm survives on kindness? I think it could, I snapped back, if someone like you believed it could. His eyes flashed. You speak as if the world is gentle, as if mercy feeds the hungry or scares away war. It doesn't. Justice born from mercy is weakness, and weakness kills. Then why didn't you kill my father? I fired back. Why didn't you destroy us if weakness kills? You had every reason, every right, and yet you stopped. So don't tell me your cruelty is just. You stopped because you knew it was wrong. His lips parted, but no sound came. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Not angry, not proud, just lost. He turned toward the city again, his voice quieter. I stopped because I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. What? I asked softly. He hesitated, then looked at me. Truly looked. A person still standing after cruelty. The words hit me harder than I expected. The wind tugged at my hair. The silence between us stretched. Raw, fragile, real. Then what makes me any different? He said finally, voice rough with doubt. I have killed. I have silenced. I have ruled with blood. What makes me anything more than him? I met his gaze. Because you stop where he didn't. He blinked. What? You stopped. My voice trembled, but I didn't back down. That night, when you could have crushed him, when the entire court wanted you to punish my family, you stopped. You didn't need to. No one would have questioned you, but you did. That's what makes you different. He stared at me, something breaking behind his eyes, something deep and buried finally clawing to the surface. For the first time, I didn't see the savage king or the ruler everyone feared. I saw a man at war with his own heart. His hand came to rest on the railing beside mine, close enough that our fingers almost touched. Heat radiated between us, steady, pulsing, undeniable. I don't deserve that kind of faith, he said quietly. Then earn it, I whispered back. The corner of his mouth twitched, half a smile, half a wound. You argue like a wolf twice your size, he said, voice low. I turned toward him, chin raised. Then maybe you should stop underestimating me. His brows lifted. Is that a challenge? Maybe. A soft, surprised sound escaped him. Laughter. The kind that didn't belong to a king, but to a man who hadn't laughed in years. Our eyes met. The tension between us cracked open, not in a kiss, not in a confession, but in shared breath and the quiet recognition that something had changed forever. He leaned closer, his breath grazing my ear. Careful, he murmured. You might start to like me. Too late, I whispered before I could stop myself. He froze. Then, slowly, almost painfully, he smiled. It wasn't sharp or cruel this time. It was real. The distance between us vanished, not in touch, but in truth. For once the savage king didn't look like the ruler above the world. He looked like a man who had finally met someone unafraid to see him. The night carried no promises, only the fragile peace that comes when two broken souls realize they've stopped running from each other When he turned to leave, his voice was softer than the wind. "Good night, little wolf." Chapter 17. The Mark of Belonging. He turned to leave. His voice was softer than the wind. "Good night, little wolf." Something inside me twisted. That ache that comes when you know a goodbye feels too heavy, too soon. Before he could take another step, I reached out and caught his hand. He froze. His skin was warm, rough with calluses, the kind that spoke of battles fought long before crowns or thrones. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The hall around us felt too quiet, the night too close. "Don't go," I whispered. He turned slowly, his eyes shadowed with confusion, or maybe warning. "You don't know what you're asking?" "Yes," I said softly. "I do." He stared at me, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "You should rest." "I can't," I admitted. "Not when you're still carrying that look, like you're about to disappear again." His gaze lowered to where my hand still held his. His fingers twitched, as if torn between pulling away and holding tighter. "You shouldn't want this," he murmured. "I am not the man you think I am." "Then show me who you are," I said, voice trembling but sure. For a long, unbearable moment, we just stood there, caught between what was forbidden and what felt inevitable. Then his resolve cracked, just a little. He turned fully toward me, the flicker of torchlight catching the gold in his eyes. His hand lifted, hesitated in midair, then brushed against my cheek. The touch was feather-light, reverent almost, as though he expected me to vanish if he pressed harder. I didn't pull away. When my fingers found his, guiding them against my skin, his breath hitched. His thumb traced the outline of my jaw, slow, unsure, as if he were memorizing it for the first and last time. "You shouldn't trust me this way," he whispered. "Then stop giving me reasons to," I whispered back. A quiet sound escaped him, half a laugh, half a sigh, before his forehead came to rest against mine. The warmth of him filled the space between us, steady and fragile. For a moment, everything stopped. The world outside the balcony, the whispers, the walls, all of it melted into stillness. And then, softly, his lips found mine. It wasn't the kind of kiss that burns. It was the kind that mends, hesitant, trembling, as if we were afraid of breaking what little we'd built. His hand slid to the back of my neck, mine tangled in the edge of his cloak. The air tasted of rain and iron, of promise and restraint. When he deepened the kiss, it wasn't hunger that drove it. It was release. Two wounded souls finding shelter in each other's silence. He pulled back first, breath uneven. His forehead stayed pressed against mine. "I swore I wouldn't touch what I couldn't protect," he murmured. "And yet here we are," I breathed. He smiled, a small quiet curve that didn't reach his eyes, but softened them all the same. "You are dangerous," he said. "You make me forget the walls that keep this kingdom safe." "Then let them fall," I whispered. His hand slid down, resting at the hollow of my throat, feeling the rhythm of my pulse. For a moment he seemed caught, torn between instinct and reason, before his fingers tightened slightly, possessive, reverent. "Tell me to stop," he said. "I won't," I answered. The moonlight poured through the balcony doors, spilling across us like liquid silver. It caught the scars on his face, the faint tremor in my hands, the look between us that said everything words could not. When he kissed me again, it was slower, deeper, not a claim but a surrender. The fire burned low, the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat, to the quiet hum of something fragile taking root. I whispered in his ear gently, "Mark me. I want to be yours. I want you to allow me love you. I want you to love me." He traced my cheek once more, then my throat, where his fingers lingered, and something warm flickered beneath my skin, faint and light. I gasped softly, but it didn't hurt. It glowed, a mark, small and pale, just at the base of my neck. He drew back slightly, eyes wide, as if seeing something he didn't mean to cause. "It's not a mark of power," he said hoarsely. "It's connection." My fingers brushed the spot. It pulsed once, in time with my heart. "Then it's ours." He didn't answer, only looked at me like a man seeing dawn for the first time after years of night. The rest of the world faded. The crown, the war, the throne, even our names. There was only us. And when morning came, I woke alone, but not empty. The mark still glowed faintly against my skin, soft as moonlight, warm as breath. Not of ownership, not of control, but of belonging. The savage and the shamed, bound not by fear or fate, but by peace. Far from the palace, no moonlight softened the night. At her father's estate, the once proud hall had gone dim and sour. The banners were frayed, the servants gone, only the echo of drink and muttered curses filled the corridors now. Her father sat at the long table, head bowed over an untouched plate, the wine spilling across the wood like a stain that would not dry. Her mother whispered sharp words about debts unpaid. Aurelia, the golden sister, stood at the window, fingers white around the curtain, staring toward the city lights with something darker than envy simmering in her eyes. "Do you think he will keep her?" Aurelia's voice trembled. Her mother shushed her, but her father slammed his hand against the table. "He's not done with me. No man humiliates me before a court and walks away." His words slurred, but the hate in them was clear. In that dim hall, bitterness grew like rot, waiting for a chance to strike. They spoke of forgiveness to outsiders, but behind closed doors they plotted, their pride wounded, their fear twisted into anger. And far above in the palace, she slept beneath the silver mark at her throat, unaware of how far her family had fallen, or how their ruin would one day come clawing back into her life. Chapter 18. The Queen Beside the Beast. The days after that night passed like a dream I was afraid to wake from. The palace, once cold and watchful, began to breathe again. Servants who used to lower their heads now smiled when they passed me. Guards nodded, and even the counselors who had once sneered now bowed, some out of respect, some out of fear. It didn't matter which. For the first time, I felt seen. And him, the savage Alpha King, he had changed too. He still ruled with an iron hand, but it was a steady one now, not the kind that crushed. His voice no longer tore through the court like thunder. It carried, calm and certain, and when he spoke, even the air listened. I could see it in the way his people moved through the palace. They walked taller, shoulders lighter, as if the shadow that had long ruled them had finally thinned. He never spoke of what happened between us that night, but the mark at my throat said enough. It pulsed faintly when he entered a room, as if my body recognized what my heart tried not to admit. Sometimes, I'd catch his eyes on me during council, steady and unreadable, and yet the faintest warmth hid behind them. A storm that had learned peace but not forgotten its fire. Still, beyond the marble walls, rumors began to spread. The beast has been tamed. The king is softening. The girl has made him weak. I heard them whispered in corridors, carried in letters smuggled through the gates. The old lords muttered over wine that fear had ruled better than love ever could. The council eyed me with careful smiles, waiting for the moment they could test the new calm. He dismissed the talk at first. "Let them bark," he said, voice flat. "A wolf doesn't answer every howl." But I saw the tension in his jaw, the shadow behind his gaze when he thought I wasn't looking. His fingers sometimes clenched when he read reports from the border, as if his body remembered old battles his heart wanted to forget. That night, I found him in the war chamber, standing before the great window, the moonlight silvering his fur cloak. "They're saying I've grown soft," he said without turning. "They're saying you've grown human," I answered softly. "There's a difference." He glanced over his shoulder, eyes sharp. "Do you think mercy makes a king?" I stepped closer until I stood beside him. "No," I said, "but it makes a man worth following." For a heartbeat, his face softened. Then his expression hardened again, as if he couldn't afford to let the softness linger. "You forget," he murmured. "Men like me don't earn loyalty. We take it." I touched the edge of his sleeve. "And yet," I whispered, "you've earned mine." He looked at me then, really looked. The space between us hummed, full of everything unspoken. His hand rose, stopping just short of my cheek, then fell again. "You shouldn't look at me that way," he said. "Why not?" "Because I might start to believe I'm something worth saving." I smiled faintly. "Maybe you are." The silence that followed wasn't cold this time. It was fragile, tender, like the hush between lightning and rain. The next morning, I walked through the palace halls, and the servants bowed lower than before. They didn't see a prisoner or even a guest. They saw something else, someone who stood beside their king and didn't flinch when he was called a beast. And when he entered the throne room later, cloak sweeping behind him, his eyes sought mine first. The court fell silent. The old lord stared, and he only said 3 words. "She stands with me." The murmurs that followed were a storm, but in his gaze I saw peace, because in that moment, the savage king had no need to be tamed. He had only needed someone unafraid to stand beside the beast and call him home. Chapter 19. The Return of Her Past. The morning the news reached me, I was sitting in the sunlit gallery, reviewing trade reports I barely understood. The words blurred as a servant rushed in, breathless. "They're here," she whispered, eyes wide. "Your family. They've come to the palace." For a long moment I didn't move. The world seemed to slow. My family. The word used to mean everything. Now it was just a wound wrapped in memory. I rose slowly. "Where?" "The throne hall," she said. They're begging for an audience with His Majesty." Of course they were. When I entered the great hall, the sound hit me first. Voices raised in false humility, the sharp tremor of desperation beneath their words. The nobles had gathered along the edges, curious as wolves scenting blood. The savage king sat on the throne, half shrouded in the dark folds of his fur cloak, his expression unreadable. At the base of the dais knelt my family. Father's once proud shoulders had caved inward. His fine coat was frayed at the cuffs. Mother clutched her shawl as though it could hide her shame. And Aurelia, the golden sister, still tried to glow, though her beauty looked brittle under the harsh light of the hall. I felt nothing. No pity, no rage, just distance. "Your Majesty," Father stammered, his voice thin, shaking. "We come not as nobles, but as humble petitioners, seeking mercy. We have paid for our sins many times over." "Have you?" the king said, his tone flat. The hall quieted. Even the torches seemed to flicker lower. Father licked his lips, fumbling for words. "My temper. It was the wine, the shame. I never meant to." "You struck your blood," the king cut in, voice low but sharp as a blade. "You called her worthless before my court. Tell me, what mercy do you expect now?" The silence that followed pressed down on the room. I could feel every gaze slide toward me, waiting. Mother broke first. "We were wrong," she sobbed. "We were blind. We didn't see her worth, but please, she's our daughter." "Was," I said quietly. Her head jerked up, eyes wide. "Was your daughter," I repeated, stepping forward until I stood at the edge of the dais. My voice didn't shake. "You made sure of that the night you turned your backs on me, the night you chose pride over love." Aurelia rose to her feet, her voice sharp with false sweetness. "And yet here you stand, in silk, beside a king. You should thank us. You wouldn't be here without us." "Enough," the king growled, the word rumbling through the hall like thunder. Aurelia's mouth snapped shut. I looked at her, at all of them, and wondered how I had ever believed I belonged to them. They had carved me out of their hearts long before that night. "Home?" I said softly, almost to myself. "You call that house a home? A place where kindness was weakness and cruelty was custom?" I met my father's eyes and he flinched. "No, I built my home where I was seen, where my worth isn't measured in obedience." The hall held its breath. The king didn't speak. He didn't have to. The faint glimmer in his eyes, quiet pride, fierce and unspoken, said enough. Father dropped his head again. "Please," he murmured, the fight finally gone. "Forgive us. Spare us what's left of our name." The king rose slowly from his throne. The sound of his boots on stone made every noble flinch. "Forgiveness is hers to give," he said, "but mercy is mine." He turned to me. "Do you wish them punished?" I stared at the broken figures before me, the people who had shaped my pain, and realized I didn't need vengeance. I had already won. "No," I said, "let them live with what they lost." The king nodded once, then gestured to his guards. "Escort them out. They are not to return." As the guards moved, Aurelia tried to speak again, but her voice broke into a sob. Father didn't look back. Mother did, once. But the moment our eyes met, she turned away, her shame too heavy to bear. The doors closed behind them with a sound that echoed like the end of a storm. For a long time, no one moved. Then, slowly, I breathed out. It felt like the first true breath I'd taken in years. The king stepped closer, not speaking, just watching me. And for the first time I understood the peace that follows after ruin. Not silence, not forgetfulness, but release. A chapter of my soul had closed. And the strange, beautiful truth was this: it hadn't ended with pain. It had ended with freedom. It had... Chapter 20. Rule of Two. The days that followed felt like spring breaking through the ashes of a long winter. Peace, soft and slow, began to bloom inside the palace walls. Forgiving them, my family, had loosened something inside me. The anger, the bitterness, even the ache. It no longer ruled me, and somehow that release had reached him too. The king, my king, was changing. Not in the way the nobles whispered about, not in weakness or surrender, but in quiet strength, the kind that comes from peace rather than power. He smiled now. Not often, and never in public. But when he did, the world seemed to stop. The first time I saw it, we were in the gardens, the morning sun spilling gold across the stone path. I said something, I don't even remember what, and he laughed, low and surprised, like he had forgotten what laughter felt like. That laugh followed me for days. The court changed with him. Where fear once ruled, something steadier began to take its place. Hope. Trust. The guards no longer bowed in terror but in loyalty. The servants no longer flinched at the sound of his footsteps. Even the council meetings, once heavy with dread, began to flow with cautious optimism. He still ruled with strength. Still commanded silence when he entered the hall. But the edge of cruelty was gone. When a young noble disrespected court law, a crime that once would have ended in blood, the king paused. His gaze swept across the room, and every man held his breath, waiting for the roar, the punishment, the fear. "Exile," he said simply. The word fell like thunder, not in fury, but finality. The council stared in disbelief. Mercy was not a word they knew from him, and yet I saw it then. The understanding in their eyes, the shift of something ancient breaking and being born anew. Later, as we walked through the moonlit corridors, I asked him why. He said nothing at first, then his hand brushed mine, light as breath. "I once thought mercy was weakness," he murmured. "You've shown me its strength." I looked up at him, smiling faintly. "And yet they still call you the Savage King." He chuckled, the sound low and rough. "Let them. Even storms have calm in them. The people began calling me the moon beside the storm. I didn't know how to feel about that. The idea that I was something gentle in his chaos, something light in his shadow. But when I caught him watching me across the throne room, that small, quiet smile touching his lips, I began to think maybe they were right. Together, we held court. He spoke of law. I spoke of compassion. He judged. I listened. We ruled not as king and servant, but as equals, two souls who had walked through ruin and come out whole. There were moments when I caught the old fire in his eyes, the wolf still prowling beneath his skin, but now it was leashed not by fear, but by choice. And sometimes, when the halls were quiet and the torches dim, he would rest his forehead against mine and whisper, "You make me forget what savagery feels like." The savage king had not grown weak. He had simply learned balance. And in that balance, we both found something stronger than power. Peace. Chapter 21. The Call to War. Peace had become our kingdom's heartbeat, steady, strong, and fragile. But peace has a scent, and wolves hungry for power can smell it from miles away. The news came with the wind. A rival alpha, Lord Draven of the North, had risen. He called my mate a softened king, said love had made him weak, that the savage king who once ruled with iron now knelt before a woman's smile. The whispers spread faster than truth. In the court halls, I heard fear in every breath. Some of the council tried to hide it, but I saw it, in the twitch of their hands, in the dart of their eyes. They wondered if their king had truly changed, or if he had lost his edge. The morning the message came, he stood in the war chamber staring down at the map. His shoulders looked broader beneath the furs, but his eyes, they had that old fire again. The kind that burned not just armies, but souls. "He calls for blood," he said softly, tracing a finger over the borderline. "Then blood he'll have." I stepped closer. Not alone. He didn't look at me at first. "This is not your fight." I almost laughed. "Everything you stand for now, everything we built, is my fight." He turned then, the wolf in him flaring for a heartbeat, before fading into something gentler. "You would ride into war beside me?" "I would ride into hell beside you," I said. Silence followed, thick and heavy, and then he reached out, his hand brushing my cheek as if committing me to memory. "Then we ride together." By dusk, the army was assembled. The courtyard roared with clashing metal and loyal howls that echoed into the twilight. I stood beside him in armor forged from silver and silk, the mark on my throat glowing faintly beneath the moon. When he mounted his black steed, the soldiers fell to their knees. When I mounted mine, they rose again, shouting our names together, one voice, one heartbeat. We rode out under the full moon, him, the storm that could destroy worlds, me, the calm that could steady them. And for the first time, the people did not see a monster and his consort. They saw a king and his queen, two halves of one soul, unbroken and unafraid. Chapter 22. The savage no more. War smells of iron, smoke, and sorrow. The field stretched before us, painted with the gray mist of dawn. Our banners cracked in the wind. The rival Alpha's army waited across the ridge, thousands strong, fangs bared, their loyalty bought with lies. When the horns sounded, the world split open. The king charged first, his roar shaking the sky. For a moment, I saw the man he once was, the unstoppable beast who tore through armies and earned his name. He moved like shadow and flame, every strike precise, every movement brutal and controlled. I fought too, though not with claws or blade. I moved through the wounded, guided healers, shielded soldiers, stood where others fell. When fear took them, I spoke. When rage blinded them, I reminded them who they fought for. Not for blood, for peace, for home. Hours blurred into chaos. Then, through the smoke, I saw him, blood on his face, his breath harsh, his eyes wild and shining gold. The rival Alpha knelt before him, armor cracked, pride shattered. "End it," Draven spat. "Show them you're still the monster they whisper about." The king raised his sword. Every man on the field held his breath. And then he dropped it. The sound of steel hitting the earth was louder than any roar. "No," he said, voice low but carrying. "Let them see I no longer need to kill to prove my power." Draven stared, disbelief twisting into something close to shame. The soldiers murmured, confused, until the king spoke again, louder this time. "This war ends with mercy, not blood." And just like that, the field went still. The wind howled, carrying away the last echo of rage. When it was over, I found him standing at the edge of the battlefield, staring at the setting sun. His furs were torn, his knuckles split, but his eyes were soft again. He sank to one knee before me, exhausted, trembling. "Fear built my throne," he whispered. "You gave it a soul." I cupped his face in my hands. "You had one all along. You just forgot how to use it." He smiled then, a small, broken, perfect smile. And for the first time since that cruel night in the hall, I saw peace, not in the kingdom, but in him. The savage king was gone. What remained was something greater, a man who had finally remembered who he was. Chapter 23. The Moon and the Crown. We returned to the capital beneath a sky of silver fire. The coronation moon hung full and bright, casting its glow over every rooftop, every banner, every heart that beat for us. The city welcomed us like rain after drought. The streets overflowed with laughter and song. The people bowed not out of fear, but love. When we reached the great hall, the court was already waiting. Every noble, every pack leader, every voice that had once whispered against us. He stood before them, still bearing the scars of war, his crown tucked beneath one arm. When he spoke, his voice filled the chamber, not with wrath, but quiet power. "This throne was forged in fire," he said, "but fire alone cannot rule. It destroys as easily as it warms. Today this kingdom rises not on fear, but on balance, on strength and grace, storm and moon." He turned to me then, the world fading until there was only us. "Kneel, my queen." My breath caught. He lifted the silver crown, its edges glinting like moonlight on still water, and placed it upon my head. The mark on my throat glowed brighter, spreading light through the room until it looked as if the moon itself had descended into our hall. The court bowed, not out of command, but reverence. He extended his hand. I took it. Together, we faced them, king and queen, storm and moon, two souls who had rebuilt an empire from the bones of pain. The savage king was no longer savage. He was sovereign. And I, once mocked, unloved, unseen, now stood eternal beside him. The moonlight poured through the glass, wrapping us both in its silver glow. His fingers tightened around mine, and he whispered so only I could hear, "Home." Yes, that was what this was. Not a crown, not power, not victory. Home. And as the bells rang and the people cheered, I lifted my gaze to the sky, where the storm had finally met its calm, and smiled. Because our story did not end with blood or roar, but with peace. The kind that only love, hard-earned and unbreakable, can bring. End of story. "Do that one more time," roared the savage Alpha King. A tale of cruelty turned to justice, rage turned to mercy, and a love strong enough to tame a storm.